Welcome to the UIAAA Connection podcast. Hometown Ticketing is proud to be the exclusive sponsor of the UIAAA Connection podcast and to provide schools nationwide with the best options for digital ticketing for their events. Visit their website at hometownticketing.com to learn how they can make digital ticketing possible and simple at your school. Thank you to Hometown Ticketing for their exclusive sponsorship of the UIAAA Connection podcast.
Welcome back to another edition of the UIAAA Connection. I'm your host, Mark Hutch Hunter. Today we have as our special guest, Dave Suter, Certified Master Athletic Administrator, the Assistant Executive Director for the Directors of Athletics of New Jersey. Welcome to the podcast, Dave.
Hutch, it is great to be here and to see you. Been a little while since Nashville, so it's good to
Absolutely
spend some time catching up.
Let's have you start by sharing with our audience here in Utah and across the nation where you grew up, where you went to college, your first job, etc.
Well, South Jersey, born and bred, and hopefully not soon, but probably buried. Have just kind of been here my entire life. I grew up in a small suburban town called Gibbstown, New Jersey, and went to Gibbstown public schools. Eventually went to high school at Faith Christian School in Collingswood, New Jersey, which is a school that was run by the church that my family attended. And then from there to what was then Glassboro State College for a bachelor's degree in health and physical education, driver's ed. And then a little bit later on, in the same buildings at the same location, got my master's degree from Rowan University. Got a master's of arts in educational leadership. Fortunately, they had the ability to offer a concentration in supervision of health, physical education, and athletics at that time. So everything kind of worked very well. So yeah, I'm pretty much a homegrown boy.
Perfect.
I said worked as did a little bit of work as a counselor at Boy Scout camp when I was younger, and then spent a couple summers doing food service down at the Jersey Shore. Not so much for the job, but just so that I could have an excuse to spend all summer down at the Jersey Shore.
Sure.
Out of college, I went back and taught for a while at my alma mater, Faith Christian School. Was there for a few years, and then found out you really, really can't support an independent lifestyle on salaries from Christian schools. So moved over to the public education side of things and spent 27 years at Salem High School, from which I retired. And now I just I play a lot of golf.
As you should.
Do a lot of DAANJ paperwork. And also I serve as an adjunct professor at Rowan University as well. I teach 2 classes in the health and physical education department, certainly making sure that those class times didn't interfere with potential tea times.
Well, obviously your time in the office, that has to take precedence.
That's it. Absolutely.
Now let's talk for a minute about when you were younger. Did you play a lot of sports, a lot of football, basketball, a lot of leagues, all that type of thing? Did you play in college, high school?
Well, as a youngster, we didn't have, as I'm sure there wasn't the organized sports like there is today. Kids have all these options. Did play organized Little League baseball in the Gibbstown Little League, but the majority of my playing athletic experience, whatever you want to call it, was basically in the sandlot in the backyard. Get a bunch of guys together, and we had this nice big old field across the street from the house. So it was a great football / baseball field. had the basketball hoop set up in the backyard. That was the majority of my athletic play as a youngster was not organized, which I think is really kind of positive. I think kids today miss developing those skills of conflict resolution, working things out. Were you safe? Were you out? You argue about it. First fist fight I was ever in my life was over a all in Sandlot baseball. Won't tell you who it was with or whether I won or lost, but just essentially, playing unorganized sports without adults telling you what to do every minute of the day helps you learn a lot of things. 3-sport athlete in high school. Played soccer, basketball, and baseball. Not because I was necessarily great at all of them, but it was a very small high school, and if we were going to have a team, everybody there was basically a 3-sport athlete. So from there, college, I did not play any college sports. I basically went to class and then went to work to help pay for tuition and that sort of thing. While I was in college, though, I did begin coaching at my alma mater, which is where I would end up eventually getting my first job, and did some basketball coaching, things like that. Came to Salem High School again, and primary reason they needed a physical education, driver education teacher. They were also looking for a men's basketball coach, so was hired on there. Also did some JV baseball coaching, and then the coveted varsity golf job became available, and jumped on that one real fast. And then the road to the AD was the athletic director that I served under was retiring. Superintendent said, "Do you want the job?" I said, "Absolutely." He said, "Okay, you need a master's degree." I was like, "Okay, how long do I have?" He says, "Well, you've got 18 months to get a." So I actually did a master's in education in 16 months.
That's incredible.
It was a lot. The real incredible thing was that my wife didn't divorce me during that period of time, because we were raising toddlers while I was doing that. So she would, we would get the kids to bed, and I'd be sitting up till 1, 2 o'clock at night working on papers, that kind of stuff. But it really worked out. It was a position I wanted, position that I held for many years at Salem High School. It was kind of tough to leave it, but the timing was right, and that's pretty much the path from the Little League field to the athletic director office.
That's perfect. Let me throw in something. I may have mentioned it before to our listeners, but you talk about the Sandlot, so that the movie The Sandlot comes to mind, which you're familiar with. It's a special place in my heart because it's filmed right here in Salt Lake County years ago at different fields, all that type of thing. So that brings back memories. Let me ask you this, Dave. Talk about your mentors for a minute, people that had a big influence on you, made a difference in your life.
Oh, well, how long's the podcast?
Well, it's as long as you want to make it, because I know you're not going to the office today because you have to teach.
No, it actually would not be a bad day to be doing that, but that's okay. I'll be there tomorrow, so that'll work out. I mean, certainly my parents, were my first mentors. Basically, taught me how to be a young man. Taught me how to be a young man of faith. And, that certainly has been a theme throughout my life. Very important, faith and family, and then football or basketball or golf or whatever. But that's been a key thing in my life. And then the other one, really, another mentor was my grandmother. My grandmother was an Irish immigrant, came over and really had to persevere. My paternal grandfather passed very, very early in their marriage. And so she basically, just had to basically support a family of 5 kids by herself. But the thing that I learned from her more than perseverance was the idea of hospitality. Um, the door to her house, even though they were very poor and she was raising 5 kids, the door to her house was always open. If you needed a meal or something like that, if she was come on in, eat with us. One of her favorite expressions was, "Come on in, we'll put an extra cup of water in the soup," just to make sure that what she had would go. Um, my Aunt Marge spent her entire career as a health and phys ed teacher, so that probably is what pushed me a little bit in that direction. Her leadership, and then the leadership and guidance of my upper elementary phys ed teacher, Skip Crawford. I probably knew by grade 5 that I was going to be a health and physical education teacher, and it was primarily due to the influence of the two of them in my life. My high school basketball coach, Pete Stevenson, basically not only taught basketball, but taught me how to be a man of character, which is something I hope comes across to the people who I work with and associate with as we're going through. And then once I got into the role of an athletic administrator, a number of people locally, some very well established New Jersey athletic directors down here in South Jersey certainly took me under their wings and helped me. And then once I started getting involved in the state organization, Bobby Hopek is probably one of the biggest influences on my development as an athletic administrator, going from someone who was shelved and was interested in helping out to eventually being in the position where I am now in New Jersey athletics.
Perfect. That's some great people you mentioned. Thanks so much for mentioning that. Let me ask you a little personal question right now, Dave. What's your biggest failure or disappointment, and what did you learn from it?
Probably my biggest disappointment had to have been that I didn't pursue a college athletic career. I had an offer to go to the King's College in Briarcliff Manor, New York, to play soccer for them. And just really, it would have been difficult for it to work. As I mentioned earlier, I basically spent my non-class time in college, either working at the local convenience store or driving a delivery truck for my dad's plumbing, heating, electric supply business. So probably, I think I missed that one aspect of college life that, I don't know that it would have made a major difference, but I think it's something that I kind of look back on it and see it like as a little gap. But then, if you look at things and realize that all things happen for a very specific reason, I look at where I am now. I look at my wife and my family and say that may not have happened had I gone to the King's College. So, who am I to question exactly how things work out? To me, I guess it worked out pretty well. But when I look back, it's like, it would have been nice to have had that collegiate athletic experience, that development of friendships outside of those that I had here in the state. But I said, so it was, I look back at it as a disappointment. I don't know that it was necessarily a negative, but that's kind of what I see as something that would have been an interesting, interesting dynamic in my life.
Thank you for sharing that insight. Let's talk about the job of today's athletic administrator and talk about how different it is from when you first got the job back at Salem High School.
Well, let me start by saying to all of those folks that are tuned into this podcast and were athletic administrators during COVID, my hat is absolutely off to you folks. I guess fortunately is the word that we'll use. I was retired before the pandemic hit, so I didn't have to deal with all of the additional things that fell upon that. We often talk as colleagues about our roles as athletic administrators and being almost a jack of all trades kind of thing. From my discussions with local colleagues and fortunately through the NIAAA, we start getting colleagues throughout the country. Just talking with them and hearing about what they were doing, I think that education in the United States was very, very well served by the men and women who were serving in the roles of athletic administrators, because we're problem solvers. And athletic administrators are able to shift gears in the middle. And that's what the pandemic was throwing at everybody. And from the experience that I had with, discussing things with colleagues, the athletic administrator in many schools was the go-to person. So that's incredible. I think there's a lot more, not even related to COVID. What the biggest change that I'll say, at least that I'm seeing in New Jersey, is that there are no lifers anymore. When I got into athletic administration, it was a career choice, and basically the ladies and gentlemen that I served with, locally as athletic administrators, were in it for the long haul. Today, I'm seeing that the position of an athletic administrator is more of just an administrative stepping stone. And part of that is because there are very few true directors of athletics left in the state of New Jersey. We have a lot of folks who are assistant principals for athletics, which means not only are they dealing with all of the responsibilities of running a quality athletic department, but they're also dealing with 9th and 10th grade discipline or just a variety of other administrative tasks, which I think really has changed the position. It changes the interaction between, not only between colleagues, but also between an athletic administrator and students. I always felt that as an athletic administrator, 99 times out of 100, my interaction with students in my school was always a positive one. It was around sports. It was around congratulations, you did a great job. Oh, that was fantastic. Certainly every once in a while you had to bring somebody in and calm them down, or give them a little bit of some words of wisdom regarding their conduct. But a vice principal, almost all of their dealings with kids is almost like, okay, you got in trouble in this class. What are we going to do about it? So it was just much more negative. So I think that's changed the dynamic radically. But one of the things that precipitated that, and I mean, it's got good and bad qualities to it. In New Jersey, you have to have a master's degree and a supervisory or administrative credential even to hold the job of athletic administrator.
Right.
So consequently, folks who are getting that job with that certificate, a lot of times are coming in and saying, okay, I've got myself a certificate, I've got an administrative position, but when's that next one going to open up? That one that I can just be at school from 8 to 4, as opposed to, as many folks who would be tuning into this podcast know, there's no such thing as an 8 to 4 day in athletic administration.
That's excellent. Let's talk for a minute now about your journey with the DAANJ and how you got involved there, and then obviously how you got involved with the NIAAA.
As a teacher, I had no idea what the DAANJ even was, which would not be uncommon. But the athletic administrator whose position I assumed on his retirement said, you have to get involved with the State Athletic Directors Association. So, that first year there, I went to the first New Jersey DAANJ annual conference. We hold our conference in March in Atlantic City, New Jersey. At that point, we were at the Trump Plaza Hotel, and went down, and just the professional development that occurred was phenomenal. I was having, as a first year AD, I had notebook full of questions, and was able not only to get some of them answered through the professional development offerings that were there, but also just networking with other folks. Probably within 2 years, I had been in contact with, at that point, Executive Director Frank Baldacchino and some of the folks that were working on, program development. And by my 3rd year, I was actually doing presentations at the state conference on areas where I had a little bit of background. A lot of it had dealing with the use of technology. I was still one of the young bucks at that point, and so I was able to help with some of the technology issues that were developing at the time in athletic administration, and then certainly through the direction of Bob Hopek again, who at that point was the professional development liaison, state coordinator for New Jersey with the NIAAA leadership training courses. Started taking courses, and eventually led to my receiving my certified athletic administrator designation, and then about 4 years later becoming a certified master athletic administrator. As things progressed, I was invited to join the DAANJ Board of Trustees representing my local area. So joined the board and basically got a chance to give back a lot of the things that I had received. As a new growing athletic administrator, up through the point of my retirement. They asked me to stay on as one of the retired members on the board. I took over the role of the membership and conference registration chairperson. I guess probably a lot of it had to do with the fact that I knew how to use the computer, and we were getting to the point of starting to digitize a lot of the work that we were doing instead of having file folders laying all over the place. And then when Frank Baldacchino decided that it was time for him to be done, and Bob Hopek was tapped as the next executive director, and really looking back at the jobs that the previous executive directors had done, realized that there was a lot of things, a lot of responsibilities that needed to be shared. So the position of assistant executive director was created by the board, and I applied and was actually ended up being the first of the New Jersey's first assistant executive director. New Jersey only ever had 3 executive directors in its entire history.
Right.
Realizing the fact that also we got to give a good old DAANJ plug here. DAANJ is the first statewide athletic administrators association in the country, and their first executive director was Virgil Sasso, and then on his passing, Frank Baldacchino stepped in, and then when Frank retired, Bob took over. So we've only had our entire history of our organization, we've only had 3 executive directors.
And that's, if I remember right, from the godfather, who has also been on the podcast. I'm thinking 1951. Is that correct?
1951 was the when we were founded. Correct.
That's incredible. Well,
2 years before I was born.
Yeah, before I was born also.
Yeah.
Let's have
in
you
terms
talk.
of the NIAAA. I mean, I knew what the NIAAA was. I knew that they were the ones that did the classes, that sort of thing. Really didn't have any feelings one way or the other. Somebody said, hey, you really need to get to an NIAAA national conference. And as that was being tossed around, but I'm looking on the website and noticed that there was the conference of the year that I started looking at. It was being held in San Diego, California. It's like, well, man, if I'm going to go anywhere to a national conference, I'm going to San Diego. So headed to San Diego. That was my first NIAAA conference, and I haven't missed one since. So, and being there, it's just so eye-opening. You get to meet people from all over the country, now all over the world, actually, and realizing how different things are, but how many things are absolutely the same. You know, what we were dealing
Mhm.
with in New Jersey, you folks in Utah were dealing with the same thing. The folks in Texas were dealing with the same thing. And come to find out, the folks in the American high schools over in Europe were dealing with it. So it was just interesting to see how a lot of the issues were international, but also all of them had their own little unique take on how to work. So that was just a phenomenal experience. And then at that point, just my nature is to jump in and get involved. Fortunately, had the opportunity when Bob took over as the executive director, had the opportunity to step in as the state liaison and also the state coordinator for professional development. Um, Very fortunate. Last year began serving a term on the certification committee as well. So just again, just getting out, getting to know people, you know, getting to read some good westerns, uh, that sort of thing. Just all makes that whole NIAAA experience what it is.
Perfect. Along those same lines, you talked about being the coordinator in New Jersey, and of course, I introduced you as the assistant executive director. Why don't you share maybe one or two successes or stories from that time frame that you've had with the New Jersey group you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, a couple of things that really kind of took off for us was we have like basically every other year now we run a summer boot camp at which we bring folks in during the summer time. We have been meeting at our state athletic association headquarters uh, and offer all the 500 courses that are necessary to take a CAA exam, um, and then offer the CAA exam at the end of that boot camp as well.
Mhm.
So we've been able to increase the number of New Jersey athletic administrators who have obtained their CAA. Now we're working on getting those people hopefully transitioned into working on their certified master athletic administrator role as well. Probably the other thing that kind of coincided with my assuming the position of assistant executive director was um, developing our relationship with Final Forms AMP,
Mhm.
and the fact that we have now all of our conference registration, all of our LTI registrations, everything are handled electronically, with options for credit card payments, all that. It's just a big step forward in terms of the organization of event registration and event payment. Most of our schools are still PO paper checks. Right before we started recording this podcast, I'm sitting here opening envelopes, because at least in New Jersey, the way school budgets and things are set up, everything still has to go through a purchase order system. Um, but just really, I think the digitalization of a lot of those clerical tasks, those accounting tasks, that's what I think has really, I think, enhanced the way folks in New Jersey look at our organization and say, oh yeah, they're staying up to date.
Perfect. I'm glad you brought that up. We'll give a shout out to Julie, I know who you work with as I do, and Clay, the founder, because Final Forms has made a huge difference here in Utah. I know it has across the country. And like you, when we first brought them on board, we were still getting a lot of checks, but a lot of schools have gone to those P cards now. And we're finding less and less checks. It just makes it easier for me, makes it easier for you to take care of that. I need to ask you a somewhat humorous question here. And I need to preface this because I know, and I hesitate to mention everybody I know from New Jersey because I don't want to leave anybody out. But of course, you mentioned the Godfather, and of course, there's Bobby Rossi, Sean, Ted, yourself, and I'm sure I'm forgetting others that I know. But that I was told to ask about the DAANJ pop manual. and sometimes how great it is, and sometimes how it's an albatross around the neck. So I'll just turn it over to you.
Well, let me say the first thing about the DAANJ POP manual, it is probably one of the primary reasons for the denuding of forests around the world, because there was so much paper involved in the printing and revision and reprinting and revision and reprinting. The POP manual, is our our procedures and policies manual. And it was developed. There was that period of time in not only New Jersey but in the NIAAA when a lot of work was going into the development of these documents to help codify what in the past had been just institutional knowledge. I think I mentioned in the past or earlier in the podcast that when Frank Baldacchino took over as the executive director, as the second executive director of the DAANJ, he did so because the fact that Virgil Sasso had passed suddenly. And so all of a sudden, it was just like, Frank was just given all these boxes. So,
Sure.
part of that process of taking the institutional knowledge of many of the members of the board and actually putting it on paper. I said, right now, the POP manual realistically sits on shelves collecting dust until we need to go back and say, is this really the way we need, we have been doing things. So it's not necessarily our day-to-day operational manual anymore. It's more of a codified institutional memory. And then also, fortunately, it's on a jump drive. Actually, it's not on my desk or on a shelf. It's on a jump drive here in a drawer in my office, and it's on a number of different hard drives. But it certainly serves the purpose again of, this is how we did things in the past, and do we need to change the way we're doing things? But yeah, it was definitely it was a labor of love, and it got to be laborious at times as well.
Exactly.
So
yeah, memories of it just brings up memories of the New Jersey family, which I've been adopted into. And of course, it's like the UIAAA family. It's like the NIAAA family. It's like all of ours together. And that's something that keeps coming up. So thanks for sharing that. Let me ask you your observations about the recent conference in Nashville. And I ask that because it's a year after Denver, which was a big hug fest, even though we had our masks on, but it's really the first one in 3 years where we got back to normal, no mask, back to a normal conference. I think it was the biggest one ever. And of course, it was in the Opryland, which is obviously I got lost there the first and second time I was there, but I digress. Share your observations about the conference in Nashville.
Well, the number one thing about the conference in Nashville, as you just mentioned, was the fact that it was very easy to achieve my 10,000 step a day goal. Navigating in that, but what a phenomenal facility that is. I said it was really the first, I think, as you mentioned, the first time we all got back together again with a collective sigh of relief, saying, okay, things are back to, I hate the term new normal, but we were back to it. It was comfortable again.
Right.
And that was the biggest thing. Hats off to NIAAA leadership, Mike and the whole team at that point, when we had to cancel the Tampa conference and go virtual. It served its purpose, but it just wasn't
the same.
NIAAA. It wasn't the NADC conference. It was
right.
It was online professional development. Sure, you got into a chat room maybe and got to catch up with folks for a little bit. But just the idea of this year's conference again being just almost collective sigh of relief that, okay, we're just going back to what we're doing. add to the fact, as you mentioned, it was the best attended NADC, in its history. So just recognizing the fact that all those folks, we're seeing the value of what not only our state athletic administrator associations do, but also the benefits that accrue from being involved with the national as well. Certainly the fact that it was Mike Blackburn's final conference made it very, very special. Just, the leadership that Mike, has provided since he assumed the role of, executive director of the NIAAA. The ability to celebrate that was certainly great. For those of us who were involved in the professional development academy and state coordinators, also it being the swan song of Jim Watkins. It was one of the founders of the whole professional development wing of the NIAAA. It just made that an even more special outing to be able to get together, not only see everybody, but to celebrate, especially the contributions of those two outstanding national leaders.
Well said. Let me ask you this, Dave. What's the favorite part of your job outside of being in the office?
Outside of being in the office, the favorite part, I don't know that there's a favorite part. I enjoy being involved with the organization.
Sure.
I talk to Bobby Hope probably 3 times a week. So it's the development of relationships, certainly. I feel I'm able to lend some areas of expertise in getting some things done. So that's helpful as well. I think rewarding wise, when I get an email or a phone call from one of our members who has achieved their CAA or CMAA recognition, just saying, "Hey, thanks for helping guide me through this journey." That tends to be the intrinsically rewarding part of the position. And then certainly just, when you're tail dragging tired that Friday of your state conference, but you look back and go, we pulled that off pretty well. That's also a very satisfying part.
Perfect. Let me finish up with a couple of questions here, Dave. The first being, you've got 2 suggestions for a brand new AD, and they need to follow these suggestions in order to become successful. What would your 2 suggestions be?
I would say, and I'm going to put them in 2 different categories. The first one is professionally. And I would say professionally that any athletic administrator, new and even not so new, I'll just throw that in there, you need to be involved. You need to take advantage of the resources that are there. You need to grow with those resources, but you need to get involved to the point where you're someone who is giving back to the next group of new athletic administrators that are coming forward. Those of us with gray hair or not as much hair or white hair or whatever, we've got a lot of experience in there, but a lot of those experiences aren't necessarily current. And so, those 5 to 10 year ADs need to be stepping up and being the new mentors of some of these new. So I would say that, professionally, get as much as you can out of your fellow athletic administrators, whether it's locally, the state or national level, but then as soon as possible, get involved in starting to give back little by little by little and help grow the profession. From a practical or personal standpoint, my advice is never eat lunch at your desk. Take some time every day to get away from the job. If it's a matter of taking your brown bag and going out and sitting in the football bleachers or jumping in the car and taking a little ride, just get yourself so that you can disconnect for a certain period of time. Because the temptation is, I can sit here and grab my sandwich off the side of the desk and still work. You're not doing yourself any favors. You need that time away. you just got to realize that it is your job. It's not your life. Sometimes it seems like it's your life when you've been there until, you got in at 8 o'clock and it's 9:30, 10 o'clock and you're still there. It feels like this is what my whole life is, but it's not. Your life revolves around a whole lot more than running a quality athletic department. So be sure to take time for yourself, and that starts with just taking that little half hour, 45 minutes in the middle of the day, just to say, this is the me time. I'm not answering a phone. I'm not having a conversation about, why the grass didn't get cut. It's just, just my little way of just getting away and grabbing a little bit of that me time.
Great suggestions. Thanks so much for sharing. We'll finish with this. Dave, what question should I have asked you that I failed to ask?
How to maintain youthful look. No, no, this was great. I enjoy, just talking athletics. It is the thing that I miss being retired from the profession, is I miss that daily interaction. So, it's really great to be able to sit down and talk about athletics, talk about the connections we have. I said, the fact that I can talk to my friends here in New Jersey, it's like, oh yeah, my buddy out in Utah, and we can talk about that. A lot of times we talk about the backdrops at the golf courses we play, and
Yes.
how uniquely different the backdrops are for the golf courses. But I said, I really don't have anything, any great words of wisdom to share. Just really appreciate the idea to sit down and talk athletics, talk, state DAANJ stuff, talk NIAAA stuff. It's been a real pleasure to spend some time with you.
Perfect. With that wraps it up for another edition of the UIAAA Connection. Once again, our guest has been Dave Suter, CMAA, the Assistant Executive Director of the DAANJ. Dave, thanks so much for being with us today.
Absolutely, Hutch. Have a great one.
For our listeners, we hope you tune in again next week for another edition of the UIAAA Connection.